Restoring Bigfoot, the 105-ton Rapier walking dragline, was a very ambitious project for the Melbourne Steam Traction Engine Club to undertake. First of all, it had to be restored to working order from derelict condition at the bottom of a coal mine in the La Trobe Valley. It then had to be transported back to the club grounds and fully restored. It was an exercise that involved many members and a huge number of hours of work spread over a couple of decades. The signature feature of the dragline is its method of propulsion. It lumbers along on 2 big feet at the rate of only about 2 meters a minute. The advantage of this is that it gives it a wide, stable base for working on. By swinging the boom through a wide arc, it is able to excavate a lot of ground from one position, so the slow speed of moving isn't really a problem. To change direction, it swivels on the base when the feet are in the air, then stops the swivelling when the feet are pointed in the right direction. From the outside, the cabin looks spacious, but the inside is stuffed full of machinery. The main source of power is a 5-cylinder National diesel. The rope winches and the walking mechanism run off the engine, but the slew is electric and the controls are pneumatic. A transfer case drives 2 generators. One of them is used to directly drive the slew. The other one provides for the rest of the electrics. An electric-driven air compressor provides the air for the controls. The main engine is started by an air motor. To provide the air, a Broom and Wade compressor is driven by a smaller National diesel. It takes about half an hour to pump up the 160 psi necessary to start the engine.
Once it starts spinning, I'll go another quick to the right, and that'll make it start to the left. Okay, so right. Yeah. When you set this thing up, yeah, no, just leave it alone. Okay.
Once the engine is up and running, the operator controls everything from the cabin. First off, he engages the main clutch, and the generators are pulled in off a transfer case. He then brings in the compressor, which will provide the air for the rest of the controls. This is the hoist and drag lever, which is used in conjunction with foot-operated brakes to control the movement of the bucket. The slew control allows the operator to swing the boom through 360 degrees, either clockwise or anti-clockwise. When he wants to engage the walking clutch, the operator has to first secure the bucket about halfway up the boom to counterbalance the weight of the engine. The dragline only walks backwards, so the operator doesn't have a very good view of where he's going. But at 2 meters a minute, it hardly matters. The State Electricity Commission of Victoria ordered the dragline from Ramsden and Rapier of Ipswich in England. It was for their new power station at Morwell. It was shipped broken down and assembled on site to begin work in 1948. It was used to dig drainage channels and to clear the overburden of the coal. Ransom's built 13 of these W90 draglines, but only 3 of them were diesel, the rest were fully electric. Presumably they bought the diesel version because the power station had not yet been commissioned. They did later buy an electric version. Bigfoot was last used operationally in 1978. It then sat around subject to vandalism until the SECV decided to put it out for sale by tender. They had no takers, but it did come to the attention of two club members, David Mickle and Peter Morris. Dave and Peter thought it was definitely worth saving, and by 1992 they had persuaded the SECV to donate it to the club. Then started a big push to get it operational. The fact that it was 150 kilometres from Melbourne meant that each visit involved a fair bit of travel time. The machine had suffered badly from vandalism and most of the glass had been broken. The bucket was buried in the mud. The starting air compressor and the little engine that drove it were gone. More than 1,000 hours went into getting the dragline operational. Members made 18 trips to Morwell, clocking up over 5,500 kilometres of travel. They tracked down the missing engine for the starting air compressor, reconditioned it, obtained a suitable compressor and cooling water tank to go with it. The main diesel engine was dismantled. It was in reasonable condition, but the valves were reconditioned, a broken spring replaced and the big ends adjusted. Two club members of this time, Ken and Dave Spillett, are electricians and worked over the electrical system. Progress was watched with interest by the mine workers, and Bigfoot's old operator couldn't wait to get his hands on the controls. It was a big day when he started up the main diesel. By the 18th of June 1994, the big day had come. The engine was started, the hoist control was operated, and to the relief of all, the bucket that had been buried for 15 years shot up out of the ground. Everyone had a play. After lunch, the original operator showed up and once again headed straight for the controls. He engaged walking mode and Bigfoot lifted itself onto its feet and walked out of the hole it had been in and up onto dry land. They had done it. Bigfoot was operational again, but it was still 100 metres down the mine and 150 kilometres from Melbourne. Disappointment followed when it was understood just how expensive it would be to get the dragline back to Melbourne. Even just to walk it up out of the pit to where it could be loaded on transport was daunting. It would take 2 solid weeks to walk it up the zigzag roads to get it onto level ground. There were 2 sets of power lines in the way as well. The craneage and transport costs back to Melbourne were far beyond the club's means at the time, and Peter was unable to procure the help he had hoped would be forthcoming from industry. All that could be done was to move it 2 or 3 times over the years to keep it clear of the backfill operations. Bigfoot had won a place in the hearts of a few of the Hazelwood mine workers, and they kept an eye out for it and contacted us when things needed to be done. They let us know when it needed to be moved. In 1996, the mine was privatised and the SECV handed it over to Hazelwood Power. tighter security arrangements were introduced which protected the machine from vandalism, but it also meant that it was very difficult for the club to get access. In 2008, things changed.
In April 2008, I received a phone call from Hazelwood Power to say that we needed to move our dragline from the area it was currently in, as they wanted to work in that area for their mining operation. And they wanted it done by the end of May.
A small group was soon gathered together, and it was off down to Hazelwood for a half-day induction and a visit to the dragline.
The first visit showed most of the items were there. The biggest problem was the rusted through airlines. An attempt was made to start the main engine on this first visit, but failed after the exhaust valve spring on the starting air compressor broke, when we only had 100 psi up in the main tank. 300 psi is needed to start the main engine. The cylinder head was taken back to Melbourne, and Frank Goff repaired the valve spring, ready for our next visit. The second visit saw the main engine going, and we mapped out which airlines needed replacing.
The air pipes sit on top of the floor and were buried under an inch or two of damp coal dust, causing them to rust out. The dust built up worst in the most inaccessible corners, and welding in confined spaces surrounded by coal dust was a challenge.
Airlines were rigged with pressure-rated hose. With everything ready to go, a new problem was found. The electromagnetic slewing brake would not release. However, some gentle persuasion saw this problem fixed, and late in the day, the dragline walked again. On our visits to Hazelwood, there were some hints that a large 300-ton load was due there in June, and there was some chance of a backload for our dragline to Melbourne. However, the timetable was tight and it was winter. We were delighted to receive a call from Hazelwood Power saying that they would not only pay for the dismantling and loading of the dragline ready for transport, but also pay for the transport back to Melbourne. This left MSTEC to pay for the unloading only.
This was great news, but it meant that both Peter Morris and Warwick Bryce had to take time off work to assist the team put together by Hazelwood Power. The first job was to walk the dragline to a suitable spot where it could be dismantled for transport. Hazelwood had contracted Bradshaws to do the job, and they proved very slick and professional with just the right gear. The first job was to lower the boom. The dragline was rigged with ropes that could lower the boom, but in all probability these had not been used since the boom was lifted in 1948. No one was confident that the old wire ropes would stand the strain, so it was decided to attach a crane and lower it to the ground that way for safety's sake. The boom is built in 4 sections, The idea was that once the boom was on the ground, the sections would be unbolted and the boom would be transported separately back to the club. In the event, they only managed to get 3 of the sections off, and the 4th section remained on the body of the dragline to be transported back with it.
Knock the pin out. Down the cables now. Boom. And she comes. Kicking up a lot of dust.
Flashing lights and clouds of dust on the hill heralded the arrival of the amazing transport trailer.
Bit bloody muddy today. Look at that soup.
The cabin of the dragline would only just make it under the bridges on the way back to Melbourne, so there was no option but to take the gantry off. The upper walkway was removed, but then it was necessary to use the oxy and cut the gantry off. It was cut off inside the cabin with the idea that we'd weld it back when we got it all back together. All those welding sparks falling down onto the coal dust in the bottom of the cabin were a bit of a worry, especially since the engine on the fire pump seems to be out of petrol.
Last one getting cut now. Here she comes.
Can't slow, so you have to get scared. Let's go back a little bit. Let's go back a bit.
Here she comes.
They're chaining it to make sure the dimensions stay stable so that we'll be able to put it back where it came from.
Good.
Bloody kid.
Do it again.
The 100-ton hydraulic jacks have arrived. There are 4 of them, so there should be no problems in lifting the dragline.
Putting in the jacks. steel plates.
Dale. Good, Dale. Good. What's going on? Hello? No. Okay. Oh, slowly but slowly. He'd make a good piggy, wouldn't he?
on that bike.
There she's up. There she's up. Pulling across a bit.
What do you got, Craig? Come on, babe. Hello, Craig. Coming down. What do you got? What do you got? Give us a little bit, please. Please. Righto. Right, Craig? What? There you go, mate.
She's on. Everyone's admiring the handiwork. Putting guides over the top to lift up power lines. Holly pipe. Welding a couple of lugs on to dog it down.
The 5 axles at the front and the 5 axles at the rear are independently steerable, essential in getting around these tight corners.
.36 he says his lock he's got. That's Neil there, steering the trailer. Front wheels turn the opposite direction to the back. I don't know, it might tip over though. Let's put it down the culvert. I don't know what they're going to do now. They go forward, the thing might tip over when the weight falls onto that bit. Oh, a bit more entertainment for us. Not much fun for them. Dale's running to his truck. Pete's getting out. John's not happy. It's going to get worse. The more weight they get, it'll fuck their trailer. Now the weight's on it, it'll be fuck those fucking axles. I think they're dreaming. We're going to dig this out. Got 160 tons there. And these reinforcements. Yeah.
Not bad for a little four-cylinder engine, eh? No babies.
Well, I might. Yeah.
As soon as you stop,
They're stuck again. Look like front of the trailer's back onto firm ground. They nearly did it. Oh, maybe I still get it. I think they're going to... Yeah. Looks like I've got it. Now we're out of the bog. Next problem's a tree.
The rig was 2 freeway lanes wide and so high that it had to go on the wrong side of the road in one place to clear under a bridge. The Vic Roads permit scheduled for it to leave at 10:30 on a Saturday night to reduce the impact on traffic.
Here they come, up the Monash.
Radio contact between the truck drivers and Vic Roads allowed Vic Roads to set the traffic lights to green as the rig approached.
Blocking the intersection. Added a nice hold up on the Monash.
Power companies had crews on Stud Road and Ferntree Gully Road to assist in getting them under power lines.
There she goes. Peter's got it lit up like a Christmas tree. Taking her in. Quite a line up with spectators. And support vehicles. She's here. Last. Believe it or not. On a wet, cold, miserable night. But good fun. They can't take their eyes off it. Daryl's having a closer look. Big truck in its day. Would have been used for heavy haulage. Maybe it still could.
The same jacks that were used to load the dragline were used to unload it. The dragline was lifted off the trailer and the trailer drove out from under it. It looked a bit mournful sitting on the arena, but the rainbow was seen as a positive sign. The boom, gantry and walkways arrived as separate loads. Down at the mine, we hoped that all that was going to be necessary to get a working exhibit was to weld the gantry back on and bolt the boom together. this was not the case. Once we got it back to the club, it was evident that there was a lot of work ahead for us. The roof was in a deplorable state. There was water pouring in every time it rained, and mixing with the coal dust on the floor was making a nasty corrosive swill that was eating away the floor. This was going to have to be fixed pretty pronto. The boom was a major problem. Everywhere two bits of metal were bolted together, rust had built up in the joint, making a sort of rust sandwich that pulled the joint apart. On top of that, where coal dust had accumulated, the ends of the cross beams were badly corroded. There was nothing for it but to pull the whole thing apart. This was all looking pretty expensive, but luckily Bill Sides, a club member who had memories of a childhood down in Morwell, very generously donated $20,000 to the project. This was enough to cover sandblasting the boom and providing materials for painting and rebuilding. The first thing to go back on was the gantry and walkway. We were keen to show some progress before the 2010 rally. With the crane holding it in place, the pylons were re-welded back inside the cabin. The roof had to be totally replaced. The old sheets were removed and used as patterns to cut new galvanized sheets. It was a big job, but relatively straightforward, and it was great to have the protection of a watertight roof. Fixing the boom was a much bigger job. All the cross braces had to come off the main beams, but you couldn't pull them off altogether because you wanted to keep the structure. So they were taken off a few at a time. Any that were sound enough were wire brushed and then painted. Some of the damaged beams could be cut down and reused in smaller spots, but overall we still had about a third replaced with new material. On Dulux recommendation, 2 coats of rust preventative paint went on top of the primer, and then a weather-resistant decorative coat went on top of that, all 2 packs. Initially there seemed to be no way of getting into the base, but when the floor was cleaned, a trapdoor was found under about 10 centimetres of coal dust. It was absolutely filthy down there. The Morrises scored the job of cleaning it up, greasing it, and replacing a lot of missing nuts. By the time they came out, they just had to throw their clothes away. With the boom completed came the issue of how we were going to raise it. It's quite possible that the wire ropes intended for raising it hadn't been used since 1948 when it was first built, so we decided we had better replace them. The heavy cables and anchors that will permanently hold the boom to the gantry were rigged up with the pulleys to the lifting cables.
We got a vice, now they've popped.
The heavy structure was held up by the crane until the winch took the strain. In no time at all, it had lifted the boom off the ground. After a bit of a struggle, the cables were locked onto the gantry and we were done. There was still 2 weeks to go before the rally, and every chance that we would have it walking. With everything greased up and ready to go, there was just one problem. Without the boom in place to balance the weight of the engine, it had been necessary to put struts under the back end, and we were worried about how we were going to get them out. As Bigfoot took its first step, they came free. Two weeks later, at the 2011 rally, Bigfoot was the star attraction.